Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar of the Digging Deep project. My name is Rosemary, and I am a Digging Deep partner and the producer for the game Shadow's Edge. Today, we are here to talk about something we haven't touched on before at the Digging Deep webinars. We are going to be talking about working with neurodivergent teens. Specifically, we will discuss how neurodiverse teens and young adults also are affected by emotional and mental health challenges, just like your typical young person. Although it might be different and it needs to be addressed according to their unique needs. And so I am here with two specialists. For one, it's Amy Jamison Casas, who is an experienced speech language pathologist, and she works primarily with children, teens, and young adults that may have autism spectrum disorder, cognitive communicative delays, and other speech and language disorders. We are also joined by Hunter Lawrence, who is a longtime friend of Amy's. Hunter will be sharing his firsthand account of what it's like to be a teen, young adult on the autism spectrum facing emotional and mental health challenges as they arise. And we will discuss mental health and neurodiversity in teens and young adults in general, because they are also affected by emotional and mental health challenges. And often that takes a backseat to their health challenges. So, Amy, it is
Yes.
so nice to have you here.
Thank
Do you want to say a couple more words about yourself? And then we'll have Hunter introduce himself too.
All right. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I don't know if I'm staring at the right place.
Yeah,
um, um, I am a speech language pathologist. I am working out of Fayetteville, Arkansas, but most of my practice is telehealth, and so I serve people from all over. And I've been a speech language pathologist now for about a decade and a half, and I love my job. It's not a job. It's not a job. It's a beautiful life work. So
great. Thanks. Hunter, do you want to say a few words about yourself?
Sure. My name is Hunter Lawrence. I am 21 years old and I am an aspiring writer. Currently, I write poetry, but somewhere down the road, I also plan to write novels at some point. And I consider myself to be a very empathetic person, and I like helping people feel seen and acknowledged. And and I really want my writing to resonate with people and to help them through their trials and tribulations. Thank you.
That sounds great, actually. And are you going to write novels with a specific genre in mind, or are you just using your characters to get those points across?
So kind of a mix of both, because I do have my own original characters that I've written, but I currently don't have a story for them. But if I had to think about the genre that I might start off with, I think I might start off as a realistic fiction writer.
That sounds great. Well, I'd love to hear more about that at some point. So let's get into some questions about today's subject. Question number one, Amy, can you describe exactly what do you do in your line of work? Like, what are the practical things you do for those of us that aren't as familiar with speech pathology or speech disorders and autism?
sure. So speech language pathology is a very broad field. It's kind of like we're kind of like physicians in that we tend to specialize because it's so broad. We serve. We're trained in everything from, simple language differences like expressive language, which is the language we produce, and receptive language, the language we understand. So we'll make sure little ones are developing their language on time, and if they need any extra support, that's where a lot of the people go into. We serve articulation disorders, like so kids who aren't saying their sounds right. We work with those kiddos. Cognitive communicative disorders, which is um, how we process language, how we problem solve, are all of our executive functioning skills. We're trained in voice disorders, so that could be everything from a vocal nodule on a cheerleader who's screaming too loud at the games and losing her voice, to a cancer patient who's had a tracheostomy and now has to learn to use alternative mechanical devices or other forms of alternative speech. To the geriatric patient in the hospital who's getting chronic pneumonia because their vocal folds aren't working right. So we do all of that. Neurological neurological differences like cerebral palsy. We might work with them when their speech is not clear, helping them to get more intelligible speech. Dysfluencies, which people are more familiar with the term stuttering. So we work with that. So I mean, it's just so huge. You have to specialize. So I narrow down to autism spectrum disorders, apraxia of speech, and cognitive communicative delays. So.
All right. And what excited you about that?
What excited me about it? Um,
Because
well,
there's
my
so much to choose from, why?
I know I really enjoyed a lot of the areas that I worked in, but I came into this career late in life, and the experience was born out of my son being diagnosed with autism back in the Stone Ages when it wasn't so well known, and I had to end up being his primary therapist through his life, and I had to figure out what to do because where we were at least, in pre-internet days where you could search easily elsewhere, there weren't a lot of answers. So I thought, well, I'm doing it. I can do this, and I thought maybe if there was a need for me as a parent, then maybe I could be of assistance to other parents and kids if their kiddos presented with the same complex needs my son did. Plus, I also speak Spanish, and I remember one day I just had this overwhelming emotion thinking about parents who maybe did not speak English and were here trying to navigate a system that I was having trouble navigating and finding answers for my baby. And I thought, also maybe I could be of support to the Spanish speaking community in that situation. So universe just pointed me that direction. So I rode the waves.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. And Hunter, maybe from your side of the experience, so can you just explain a little bit about autism spectrum disorder as you see it, as somebody who's affected by it? Just
Sure
just
thing.
for readers, for viewers who don't know exactly what it is and what it can feel like, what it is, what it can be.
Okay. So autism, it's a disorder that affects um, people's social skills and sometimes their ability to communicate. I was diagnosed with autism when I was 6 years old. So for most of my life, I've known that I've had that I've had autism. But when I was young, I kind of felt alienated because of it, because
Mhm.
from a very young age, I had to navigate that I was different from other people, and when you're a 6 year old just starting off in school, it's not always easy. So as I got older and as I learned more about autism and the autism spectrum, I began to feel less alone. And once I got like good mentors in my life, people who saw my potential and people who wanted to help me grow, it helped me flourish. And I owe a lot to those people because they got me to where I am now. And my heart goes out to children and teens with autism because, especially in the school system, I feel like a lot of their potential is often overlooked, or
Mhm.
they're just put in a corner, and people don't really think about them that
Mhm.
much. It pains me because like autistic children have so much potential, and just because we're different from other people doesn't mean we don't experience the struggles that any person would experience.
Those are great points, and we'll get back to some of those. Amy, how does what both of you just said, how does that fit into neurodiversity? Can you explain that for the parents that may be listening?
Yes. So neurodiversity was a term that started to get coined in the late 90s. So it implies there's a range of differences in human behavior, maybe sociability, mood, attention, uh, the differences in individual brain functions and behavioral traits, but that neurodiverse is simply a variation of all of our human individual traits and differences,
Mhm.
not delayed, just just a variation, you know.
Mhm.
So we all experience anxiety. How it might be different how someone on the spectrum shows that they're exhibiting anxiety, but it's still anxiety, you know, and stuff like that. So it's a more inclusive term to stop like dumping people off in just these isolated categories
Mhm.
where, oh well, that's just he's just autistic, you know, and so they don't address the underlying need. He's a human being showing it in his very variation.
Times people see, for example, autism as mental illness, mental health illness. So, what is in that spectrum and what is not?
Prior to now, I mean, you get clusters of groups of individuals that work, you know, you might be lucky to have a psychologist, a psychiatrist, and a speech path, and an OT, and everybody working together and they communicate well. Seems kind of rare, and it's emerging. We're getting there. It needs to be a team approach so you can dissect. Okay, wait a minute. Now we're moving over into mental health, and we need the psychologists and psychiatrists to really be forefront here. But where I come in is okay, wait a minute, before we label this as a mental health thing, which is okay as well, we have help for that too. You know, let's double check that this isn't simply frustration out of not being able to communicate. Maybe there's pain. Maybe there's someone today on the playground made fun of him, but he can't tell you, you know, so it's going to come off as behavior or whatever and look like other diagnoses in mental health. Sometimes we have comorbid, is what we call it when there's two diagnoses or more. You know, sometimes we're dealing with both. Um, it really takes a team approach to really look and not jump to it's one or the other. I've seen both. I've seen people jump to, well, that's bipolar disorder, or I've seen them jump to that's autism, and it's wonderful when you can see no one jump to any conclusion, but to get to know that child, to find a way to communicate with that person, even if the person's nonverbal, there are ways to observe and be quiet and watch and get to the source of what looks like anxiety. What if it's not anxiety? What if it's really just sensory overload? And all we'd have to do is give the kid a little input in the way he needs it, or pull back on the noise or the lights, or, you know, whatever. I mean, it needs to be a team approach. What I see so often, though, is here's 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 psychologists and psychiatrists over here. That, you know, different room. Here's speech paths. Okay, the OTs are over here. The school teachers over here. The parents over here. Um, you know, and no, and there's not a connection between disciplines, and that's when you get to the bottom of it. Is when everybody says, "Where is my specialty in here, and how can I help? How can
Mhm.
I help this child?" And how can we help get to the correct diagnosis? It's hard. It's hard. I have had where the parents are so terrified of a mental health diagnoses that they will not address that, hey, we've gone past autism here. You know,
Mhm.
this is unhealthy scripting at this point. It has now turned into an obsession that's gone to a very unhealthy part. And I, as the clinician that monitors my areas, would love to have an expert from that area to chime in, so I make sure I'm doing this right. So that's our number one need, besides funding for these things, to de-escalate this fear of a mental health diagnosis, and to be able to serve the children better. Did I answer that?
Yeah, you did. So I want to follow up also on something both of you touched upon in earlier responses. So you said you had basically, you started in sort of the stone ages with this topic when there was no internet search and all those kind of things, and you had to sort of figure it out for yourself. And Hunter, you also said that you were, a lot of times at the beginning, you were figuring things out and for yourself. And as both of you were learning from each of your respective backgrounds, you know, that's when things became easier also for you. So maybe Amy, if you can start and just say a little bit more about your personal experience with, your son, and how it was for you, how you got into this line of work. And then Hunter, I'd also love to learn from you what you did to learn more about it, and how it helped you over time to really be more knowledgeable about the subject.
Okay, so at the time Stephen was diagnosed, there was no such thing as internet. So I had to go down to the library, the public library, and I lived in a big enough city. There were at least 100,000 people there, right? So the library had more than a few rooms. And I had to go card catalog style and look up. And the only thing I could find in the card catalog regarding this thing called autism that I had only heard of in Rain Man, the movie, right, um, was there were two books. Bruno Bedelheim, a book from way earlier, and then a more recent book that had been written by a woman, Temple Grandin, who's kind of famous in the autism world and one of my biggest sheroes, um, called Thinking in Pictures. So I checked out both books. And so the first one I opened, I thought, well, I'll open the oldest one first because, that's probably got more research, right? Oh, it was terrible. And Bruno Bedelheim's name, I mean, he did some great things in his field and some discoveries, but what he did for autism was not helpful. It was he coined the term refrigerator mother. I mean, he basically started a whole generation of it's the mother's fault. Well, she's failed to attach, or she's abusive, or she's not talking to the baby enough, or she's cold like a refrigerator. There were mothers. I mean, when you're a mother, I mean, you second guess everything you do. Ever. You're constantly worried you're screwing your kids up, right? It's just what we do, right? But this was on a whole nother level. Like, I did this? No. And I had been bombarded with messages like, you just need to spank him more. I live in the South, okay? You just need to bust his booty, and he just he's just a brat. And man, that's destructive when you're all alone. I had very few isolated friends going, I don't know, but and then I happened to come across one friend whose niece in Oklahoma City was autistic, and she said, "Hey, Stephen acts a lot like my niece did before she was diagnosed." So that's what got me started. So I read this book and I was like, I went with my gut because I knew how much I loved my baby and nurtured him. And so I just dumped that book to the side and poured myself into Temple Grandin's Thinking in Pictures. And she herself is on the spectrum. She has a PhD in animal husbandry. She actually speaks here at the University of Arkansas all the time in the agriculture department. She's phenomenal, and she gets to the point like I struggle with doing. But she anyway, it gave me so much hope. The mom just, she credits almost everything to her mom just not giving up, finding a way. And she had extremely averse behaviors when she was little and struggled with verbal skills. And so that's how it started. And then our developmental centers, we only had two, maybe three in the state. I know of two at the time. And so I had to drive 5 hours to the capital multiple times. And it was just when they finally diagnosed him, uh, they just said, he'll never speak, or if he does, whatever you get by age 7 is all he'll be able to do, and you will have to institutionalize him. He'll never have a job. This is it. I'm sorry. Okay. Also, get him in a preschool, get SSI Medicaid, get him occupational therapy and speech therapy. Bye. That was it. And so that's where I've heard that same story so many times from other parents, almost identical. So that's how we started.
And so, Hunter, maybe a little bit from your journey of finding out and learning, and how that helped you.
So shortly after I was diagnosed at age 6, I got placed in special ed for the first time, and at first I remember just feeling a lot of mixed feelings because for because for most of my childhood and most of my early education years, I had a lot of trouble with learning. Like I've always had trouble learning math and understanding math, and I even struggled with reading for the longest time. But as I said earlier, I owe a lot to my teachers for not giving up on me after knowing that I had a disability. Because if it wasn't for, I think it was my first or second grade teacher, if it wasn't for them continually finding alternative ways to teach me how to read, I wouldn't be able to read today. And and as a writer, imagining myself when I was young not being able to read, and then now knowing that I love to read book
Mm,
after book,
it's
it
amazing.
makes me feel proud of myself for knowing that I didn't give up on myself and that other people didn't.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, why do you think is it that neurodiversity, while it's so important, it's really just only now becoming more well known? Do you think that's also an influence of books and education or movies, or? And I'd love to hear both of your perspective. Amy, maybe we can start with you.
I think we're living in a new era where people are demanding we address these issues. It's about time. I think we're waking up as humans, and we're not going to reach utopia, but we certainly could have a more fair and just and equal opportunity experience on this planet. And I think we're like all issues where there's been discrimination. It's just people keep pushing. They just keep pushing and giving alternative ways to approach things.
Mhm.
I hope we're evolving as humans. That would be the idea. So I think that's why I think we are living in an age where we're ready. A lot of people are ready to embrace new concepts like this. What do
Mhm.
you think, Hunter?
So I definitely agree with that because I feel like in today's world, we're living in the age of information. In today's world, people are able to know so much about anything they want to know about. And I feel like that's really good comparing how things are now to the past, because in the past, people had little to no knowledge about things. And now, today, we have a wide range of knowledge to better help those in our community who are most at risk, or those in our community who are just completely overlooked. So I think for any parents who have younger children who have just been diagnosed, or who are planning to see if their child could be diagnosed with something, I think living in today's world is great for those parents because they can find the information to better help their child, just like what Amy did.
I will say on a flip side of that too, though, they also get overstimulated with all the information. The parents out there right now too. I used to feel very sorry for myself at how hard it was for me to access information.
Mhm.
And for many years, I think I was kind of impatient with other parents because they had the internet. They
Yeah.
had all this. And I had to learn to calm my judgment and ego down on that. And I will be learning that the rest of my life, honestly. I mean, it's going to always be something I have to keep in check. But talk about overstimulating when you do one search where I could only find two opinions in my card catalog search, they're finding a million. And everybody's making money off of their concern over their child, so they've got a lot to face too in that area.
And
Do you
both of you touched upon. I'll give. Sorry, Hunter. I'll give you a minute as well. But I just want to pick one thing up that both of you said. Both of you touched upon individuals, as in it's not no one person is just like another. It's not like you have autism and then this is it, or you are neurodiverse and this is then it. This is how you behave. So I'd love for both of you, and we'll start with Hunter because you raised your hand also because you wanted to add something, but if you could also, pitch in on that a little bit, just explaining that to people, what that's like.
so but before I'll start with that before I go to the comment that I wanted to make.
Okay.
So as we all know, neurodiversity, everybody experiences that differently. And when we think about autism, like out of all the different neurodiverse things, but if we think about autism directly, everybody experiences it differently. When it comes to like overstimulation or communication impairments or social difficulties, everybody experiences those things differently. And I think it's kind of like a double-edged sword, because there's something to say that's beautiful about that, but then there's also something that, as I've said before, that can be kind of alienating, because some some kids or some teens might be good at communication, but they might be lacking um when it comes to their organizational skills. Or some people have a really strong work ethic and they're a hard worker, but they struggle to make friends. And that's where my heart kind of goes out to people who struggle with those individual not problems, but those individual struggles, things that can be overcome over time. And it pains my heart to think that you have this amazing teen, this amazing kid who is so kind, so insightful, and they're a really hard worker. They do really well at anything they set out to do, but they struggle to make friends, because with people who don't have autism, or allistic, ableist people, they interpret this teen or this kid differently, and I don't think that's fair to them, when they deserve to have friends and they're trying to make friends, but it's hard for them to navigate those social interactions, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Amy, anything you want to add from a, an individual perspective and how individual all these clients are?
Oh man, I'll give Hunter as an example, if I may, Hunter.
Sure.
um, One of the most prevailing things I've heard through the years about autism is, oh, they lack empathy. Oh, get me started on a roll. I think maybe, well, like Hunter is one of my friends who has more empathy on others than most people I know. Like I think maybe because of the communication barriers, because of the sensory overload, maybe kids who have issues with tactile touch and nearness, and or they tend to shut down, does not mean they don't have empathy. I think there's just been so much misinterpretation for so long. And I have seen so many times my clients, I could be having a bad day, and the first person on that in the whole day would be that child. Now, did they come up and, if they're nonverbal, and say, Miss Amy, you doing okay, or whatever? No, I mean, it's about watching and being open to seeing the child communicate in their way. But I have seen so many differences. I have seen, like, I think people tend to lump, maybe, like, it's the whole term low functioning and high functioning, which we're there right now, and it's better than the horrible terminology they used to use, but we're going to have to still find something better, because talk about differences, and get me on a checkbook and I'm completely low functioning, but you know my son, for example, as compared to Hunter, my son is 28, a little bit older than Hunter, still mostly nonverbal, still struggles with day-to-day life skills, but I find him quite high functioning when it comes to figuring out how to get what he wants. If I had all the barriers to leap over that he had and still be able to manage to get my needs met, I find him amazing. Flip side, though, most people think he doesn't know what was being said in front of him in the room. Um, I've I asked, one time I was sitting across the table during a yearly IEP meeting with the schools, and the psych examiner it was her turn to describe his strengths and weaknesses, and the weaknesses were this long, and there was not a zero strength listed. And I was
Mhm.
like, I'm sorry, you forgot a line. And she's like, well, I'm sorry, he doesn't have any strengths, and yeah, and this is a person in charge. This was a psychologist, and in charge of a lot of kids' programming. Now, you go on to someone, for example, you, Hunter, highly verbal, clearly, I mean, I think exceptional and very talented, you know. Um, and, but what if I just assume he's not anxious over something, you know, and I expect him because of all these out front skills, I don't ever address, hey, are you feeling okay with this? Maybe he and I both have had anxiety. We've talked about it this morning. Like just, oh my gosh, we're talking to people. I'm a one-on-one person, right? But knowing that a lot of people will see this, I was having anxiety. We talked about it together. Do I have an autism diagnosis? No, I had anxiety. He has an autism diagnosis. He had anxiety, and we had anxiety over the same thing. But we checked in with each other.
Hunter, we're now talking a little bit about also challenges, right? Amy explained some of the challenges her son had. Can you just share some of the challenges, especially also that's something that maybe, might reflect crossover into mental health areas? How do you know that you're dealing with something that's past your diagnosis, and how you manage that then when you're going through things like that?
Yeah. So when I when I was when I first started going to NWAC shortly after I graduated high school,
That's
I
your
I
local community
began
college, right?
community college. I began trying to forge friendships with certain people, and I think like in the end, a lot of those friendships ended up having a falling out because I learned that I was investing more into the friendships than they were, and at first I kind of racked my brain over it because I was trying to understand how people could be so careless of other people or could just ignore another person's needs, and when it comes to dealing with the aftermath of that, because it kind of put me in a dark place when I lost those friends, or when for even some I had to tell myself that it's okay to cut people out of your life, especially if it's going to benefit your mental health. But as a person with autism, I can't speak for everyone, but from my personal standpoint, I tend to feel things very intensely. And as I've gotten older and as I've understood my disorder more, I've come to associate that me feeling things in a more intense way, in it corresponds with my autism. So it was a really hard experience having to lose friends and having to realize that people are going to let you down, but it also taught me how to navigate that and just how to build some coping mechanisms for if I feel a very strong emotion, to like help myself move past that or to help myself address that, because I taught myself the process of allow yourself to feel what you're feeling, no matter if it's negative or positive. Just feel what you're feeling and then process it. Try to think about what brought that feeling about within you, and then deal with it or find a way to move forward with it, whether it's forgiving yourself or whether it's forgiving the other person. So this is like a little off topic, but I started off as an intern at Embassy Suites working with other people on the spectrum back in August. And that program was really good for me because it helped me gain really good work experience and really good work ethic. And I also got to make really close friendships with other people who are on the autism or Asperger spectrum. And that was good for me because as I've gotten older, I haven't really gotten the chance to be around people my age who are on the spectrum. So about overstimulation, like by getting to know these people who I'm happy to call my friends, I'm able to see how overstimulation affects people in different ways. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And Amy, maybe you can, from the perspective of your job and your vocation and what you do, maybe you can talk a little bit about how do you see that the anxiety could be unrelated to a neurodiversity, or it could be related to, or one is triggering the other? What do you look for, and how can you see that specifically also, for parents at home, who may be listening to this webinar, and give them some ideas and some tips, and how do you get started? What should they look for and do?
Absolutely. Okay, so The very first thing is, and the hardest thing, is to remain calm as the parent. This is your child, um, and you are going to hear everyone's opinions. And I really believe parents should trust their intuition. Make sure it's educated intuition, like you've educated yourself. But I mean, the doctors, they they will rush you in and out, and they're not. It's just the nature of the beast of especially healthcare in the United States. It's an in and out kind of thing, and if they're very quick to like throw with a child with autism, they'll throw them on medication quickly, an antipsychotic that sometimes has some very not good side effects. Sometimes they're the right. I'm not against medication. I'm saying sometimes these things happen, and then you can't see because you didn't get to the bottom of why was this behavior occurring. I'll give you an example. I had a client who had and even through high school, I mean, from little on, and he was very aggressive, and it would just hit out of the blue. Broke one of my colleagues' noses one day, and he was no one knew what to do. We addressed communication, so he had basic communication, still struggled with relaying communication for pain though. Long story short, he had lesions on his frontal lobe from years after they finally, I mean, couldn't, doctors weren't doing MRIs and other studies. They weren't doing imaging. They were just jumping to medication first. So he had literally a, a a lesion on his, I mean, lesions on his frontal lobes, and they felt like that was from a history of excruciating migraines. I mean, come on, if your headache's so bad it's causing lesions on your frontal lobe, and he could not express it, right? So start early trying to find alternative communication methods. If the child is verbal, really start labeling different emotions, find creative ways, like with their favorite movies and flashcards, but also imitation, like mommy's games, mommy's sad, mommy's happy, and don't be afraid to use big words too. Like I have seen kids navigate so my kids who love and have really big vocabularies, I've seen them navigate to a word like crestfallen or you know, just all kinds of emotion words versus happy, sad. Happy. We have so many emotions. Don't be afraid to teach the kids big words. On the other end, with when you're dealing with kids with, say, like a picture system, right? Like a picture exchange communication system, or a device with a bunch of icons on there that you can teach the child to communicate constantly. When you have the opportunity every day, show them cards with happy, sad, other ones, all kinds of feelings, pain, help me, all these things. It can take years. My son is 28 and he still can't consistently communicate to me. It's so hard for the parents where it hurts. One time he had a blister on his foot that had gone unnoticed. I mean, when a kid's he was 17 and in high school. Thank goodness the teacher in that classroom that year was just amazing. And he was pulling hair, biting his arms, attacking classmates. That could be very much immediately termed as something. But what it was, she took his socks off. I mean, a 17-year-old. She examined his whole body. What's going on? And it was a blister on his foot that was awful, that mother had missed, And then so take that moment. Oh my gosh, you have a blister. That's the moment to immediately go to their device, show them, oh, foot hurts, help me, blister, ow, all of it. Find the ones they navigate to. So that's a big one. Teach them that you're going to make sure they know that you're not going to give up. Now, though, when does it cross over? I will say parents need to be on the lookout for scripts that get really destructive. I see a lot of scripting we do teach kids on the spectrum scripts to help them in social situations, right? So, what do you say in this situation? But then sometimes it gets to the point where it's turned into a loop that has become where I need someone else outside of what I do to step in. And that's when I believe we've gone on to a destructive pattern that we need expertise to help them not rely solely on those scripts to function in day-to-day life or in social situations. And it's really hard. You need to double check, get very familiar with sensory processing in autism. The Out of Sync Child series is just phenomenal. There's a whole bunch. It will give you all kinds of ideas to help you, checklists in all those books. And it will describe, you can look and see, okay, where's my child in this area? When those things don't work, when you can't, that creativity doesn't work, okay, well then you need to think. When mindfulness exercises are not getting you where you need to be, when adding communication systems finally to kids who have not been able to communicate are not working, yeah, you need to consider that you're dealing with something else as well. And don't be hesitant to reach out to the psychologists and psychiatrists.
I just want to pick up on that as well and say, we will be distributing a list of resources that are really helpful. And unfortunately, we've kind of come to the end of our webinar today. And I want to give the final question to Hunter. If you could name one thing that you would want people to know about neurodiversity and what it's like for you as a patient, as a young person, what would that be? What would you like people to know?
So the advice that I have for parents who have teens or children with autism or disability, help them from a young age to understand that the emotions and the things that they feel are normal. Because more often than not, if you in school or in any setting in the community, if a child or a teen is isolated from a young age, they're gonna grow up thinking that the strong emotions that they feel, anger, sadness, frustration, depression, anxiety, they're gonna think that only they feel those things. So I feel like it's important as parents for the parents of these children to help their kids understand these things are normal and it's okay to feel these things. It's okay to feel anxious. It's okay to feel depressed. It's okay to feel frustrated. Because once you know that every single person in the world experiences these emotions, in a way it helps you feel less alone, and then it also erases the stigmatization against mental health. That makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense, actually, and it's a very, very good closing point. So with this, I would like to thank both of you for, showing up here and being so honest also about your personal experiences. We know that that's something that people, that listen to our webinars really value, because some of them might be in that situation, right, and might not know what to do. So thank you both very much for coming out here. And as mentioned, we'll be sending out a list of resources, and we have Lacey who will field some of the questions as well after this webinar. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Rosemary.